Welcome to the Restoration Activation Project video commentary series. Hi, Mary Ann here, and I'm glad you could be with me. In this commentary, I'm going to be exploring some different steps you can take, and these are really important in terms of stepping more into your true nature, your true self. And the work, not only the self-mastery work and ascension process work, but the unique ways, your unique purpose, the unique ways in which you carry it out. And for some, this is easier for some than others. It's easier for some to identify and tap into that uniqueness. And some of this has to do with how far along you are on the journey, but not always. Pardon me. And sometimes it's more difficult, not always, but for some people who have suffered extreme abuse, for example, it's more difficult to tap into that. And what I'm really talking about is stepping back into and getting in the flow of the ever-evolving true you, what makes you unique, and how we can apply that in the process of self-mastery and the ascension work, and to live richer, fuller lives as well. So we basically, as children, come into this world with some sense of that. We come in with that. But due to trauma, in particular extreme trauma, and heavy social engineering and mind control, and depending upon the extent of external factors in your life, if you have been exposed to a lot of, fluoride during the course of your life, just any number of different influencing factors can take us away from our knowing of what we are. But having said that, many of us can, well, I'll step back here a minute. And because of these traumas and this programming and so forth, we fall into these belief systems about ourselves. What we are, what we could be, what we can't be, all of those different things. Because when we took on these beliefs, either to make us, enable us to, for self-survival purposes, for, going along to get along, we adopt these beliefs, the very baseline being, more often than not, I'm not enough or I'm not good enough. That's one of the baseline beliefs, related to core wounding, or wounding that we've carried forth that is now showing up from other incarnations and versions of ourselves for whatever reason at this time, being stimulated further by the nearing of the convergence point of this evolution cycle, unfolding into the next. But in the process of taking on those false beliefs, those beliefs about ourselves, those distortions, one of the things we do, in addition to beginning to identify through attachment to those beliefs, is we start wearing these masks. We take on these false personas. We start playing these false roles, presenting ourselves as one thing, our public persona. And we take on all these different false behaviors and personas. And so now we've got to go back through all those masks. It's just, working back through, peeling back layers and layers of all these distortions. And one of those reasons is to get back to who we truly are, true uniqueness, as part of the alignment with soul, core self-consciousness, and restoring the mind-body complex, and addressing and healing the various areas of our lives. All of those things, but stepping back into our uniqueness, and part of that involves getting in touch with, reactivating various creational capacities. And one of these creational capacities, one of the venues, creational venues, is through the various functional roles that we take on in life. Now, I distinguish between societal role and functional role. We also choose to take on some of our societal roles. Some of them we don't have direct say so over. For example, a societal role being, sister or brother, aunt, uncle, nephew, cousin, whatever. Some of those are inherent to this particular incarnation. But other societal roles we take on. We step into them consciously. Maybe not soul consciousness, core self-consciousness, but we step into them or fall into them somehow or another. Pardon me. Becoming a father or a mother, a parent, a grandparent. Becoming an engineer, a computer analyst, a financial planner, a caregiver, an architect, and so on. You get the idea. But those are societal roles. But during the course of performing even those roles, we take on various functional roles. For example, let's take the engineer, for example. Yes, his societal role is, technician, if you will, engineer. But during the course of performing his job, he probably takes on other functional roles, such as, or functional roles. For example, teacher, explorer, guide. If he is maybe he takes on the role of entertainer sometimes among his peers. Other examples might be, I got a list here. Maybe he's also a negotiator and a researcher, and so on. You get the idea. But when we've taken on all these distortions, we oftentimes forget some of these functional roles that we're naturally equipped with. And beyond that, we forget about that. And I'm going to walk you through some ways to sort of get in contact with that again. But we can also, when you consider that we are multiversioned beings. And that the more we connect with, commune with core self consciousness, we can actually use those communications, those connections, to start tapping into all of the different societal included and functional roles that we may have already, that we have probably experience in other versions of ourselves, and tapping into that. And yes, we would still need to take steps if we're looking, if we're wanting to take on a different type of employment, that kind of a societal role, then we would still have to get training in this reality, in this expression. But tapping into the skills that we have acquired and the knowledge and wisdom through the various versions of ourselves. Because in wearing all of these masks, we've lost touch with all of that, many of us. Now, as we progress along this journey, as I mentioned earlier, some of us sort of naturally, perhaps we've known all along various roles that we were here to perform, but they had been suppressed for a long time, and then once we started doing work, they came back to the forefront, and that enabled us to see more and more functional roles that we identified with, not in the sense of ego identification, but soul remembrance in terms of purpose, unique purpose, from that sense, remembering. But for some of us, it's like starting over. And in fact, sometimes I've worked with people that the more they clear out and get in tune with, sometimes they feel lost. They feel like they don't know themselves at all. That what's coming, the slate is being cleared. All of the distortions, those things are being healed, and they don't recognize who they're seeing, and they feel sort of lost with that, and kind of don't know what steps. They know that they're in a place, they're in a situation, or playing various, performing various societal and or functional roles, and they have a deep knowing, inner knowing, that it's appropriate for them on their journeys to step away from those into something else. And they have sort of an idea, but they're not really clear about where to step. Because remember, the progressive approach to this, to change and transformation is not fear-based getting away from, but real love-based acceptance, unconditional acceptance-based transition and transformation. Not, I know I want to get away from this, but what do I wish to move toward? So from that perspective. And so one of the simplest and easiest ways to, if you're feeling a bit lost in this, perhaps you want to, you know that it's time. It's not based in fear, but you know that it's time for you to find a different way or ways to earn an income. Or that you have been so, perhaps you were one of many of us who went through the doormat phase. You're trying to come out of that. What can you step into to help you move and grow and expand on your journey, which expands your consciousness and further enables you to tap into soul and core self awareness and creational capacities. The more aligned we get to our true selves, and that's an ever-changing thing too, but the more we can align with that, the more we deepen our connection with soul core self, and the more progress we make. And the more progress we make, the more we deepen those connections. And it's a becomes a self-perpetuating cycle of growth and progression. So one of the basic ways you can sort of begin tapping into some of these things is by going back to childhood. Looking back at various experiences and events wherein you felt more confident, more self-assured, more comfortable with yourself than you do now. And so bring up some of those memories. And then in sort of an alpha meditative state, not full meditation, but in a relaxed state, as if you were going into meditation, contemplate all the different aspects of that memory that, look at why you felt more confident. What were you doing? What were you saying? What was going on in the memory? What was happening? Was someone else with you? And what you were doing? And if so, what were you doing that made you feel more self-assured and self-confident about yourself? Were you maybe showing a young friend how to do something, and you got pleasure from that? So the role of teacher. Perhaps two of your friends were arguing, and you became at one point in your life, you became known as you were the peacemaker. So the role of mediator. You could see both sides of the situation. You could relate to both of your friends in the argument, and you intuitively knew what to say or do to help both of them, shake hands. And if not agree, but at least stop arguing, you knew how to do that. So those kind of experiences. Or perhaps you had perhaps one of the neighborhood children, or perhaps a younger sibling, was being bullied. Or you were being bullied. And you instinctively knew, and maybe not so much yourself, but with someone else, it was easier for you to step into the situation as a protector, a defender, a warrior. So bring up these kinds of memories, childhood memories, and make notes of the things that were going on, experiences, memories of experiences. And some of you might say, well, I don't have any. Well, even except for the most extreme cases of abuse, have some memories wherein we felt more self-confident. And maybe those memories don't involve anyone else. Maybe moments that we had to ourselves, that we were able to find a sense of even if it was momentary, a sense of peace or inner strength. What did we say to ourselves? How did we do that? We were mentoring ourselves, being our own caregivers, nurturers. So those are potential functional roles to experiment with now. Perhaps you live near an elderly person who doesn't have family or means to necessarily have as much help as they need. And maybe you're already helping them, the individual, or perhaps it's an elderly couple. You help them carry in their groceries and things like that. And if you aren't, you can start doing that. But perhaps becoming a handy person, helping them do little tasks, little repairs around the house that they're no longer able to do. Or hanging curtains, or maybe preparing a meal for them every now and then, reading them a book. Perhaps one of your friends, and some of you already have a sense of, many of you feel like you already feel like you're kind of the go-to person for your friends. And you experience this kind of throughout your life, but you didn't ever really think about it in those terms. You were the person that family members or friends came to for advice because you were compassionate and you cared. And so your advice came from the heart center, and it was aligned with the thoughts and your intuition, and advice just flowed. Good advice. And it doesn't matter whether or not the other person took that advice. That's beside the point. But that people were drawn to you because of that. They came to you. So consider that. And if there are, perhaps there is a single parent in your neighborhood, and they're parenting children, and they work, and perhaps the children don't have as much paternal or maternal guidance as would be of benefit. Perhaps you can, you could offer to step into that and become perhaps a mentor or a guide or a teacher, helping them with their studies, their homework. Perhaps your community is in need, your community is one of these wherein they're building, a community garden. You become a gardener. They're bringing, permaculture and sustainable techniques into the process. And maybe this wonderful garden could use a bench or two. Maybe you build a bench or two. So you're an engineer and an architect. But you get the idea. It's about experimenting. For those of you who don't already have a sense, and even if you do, it's about stretching yourself too. It's like, wow, I never thought of that. I've never tried that. I want to try that. I've always thought, well, maybe I would like to be, a gardener, but I just didn't think I had the skills to do that. Well, you can do research. But it doesn't matter what it is. Or becoming, perhaps you always wanted, but again, you were told at an early age that you were terrible. You wanted to be an artist of some sort, a sculptor or whatever. So you gave it up, you put it aside, even though you can go back and remember that even if you didn't weren't able to paint or sketch or draw a lot because of your home situation as a child, but you had that desire. So what's stopping you now? And these are all creative expression, and they enable you to really get it more in tune with what you really are and why you're really here, and the unique ways in which you're intended to be here and to be you in this process. And tapping into that and experimenting with it and playing with it and having fun. Fun, remember fun? Having fun with it. Getting back to the bully scenarios that I mentioned earlier. Maybe now you've been experiencing a lot of regressive interference, and you're feeling really afraid and tense. I put forth that this would be a great time to experiment with being more, taking on the functional role of self-defender, self-protector, spiritual warrior. That because you know that you didn't come here without anything that you need to continue progressing on a journey of self-mastery and ascension. You came here with everything you need. Yes, for a lot of us, those things have been deeply suppressed, scattered to the wind, seemingly. But trusting that, and that you do have access to core self, and through meditation, tuning into all of the different functional roles you've played. And this isn't about thinking you have to have other life memories. It's not about that. If you have some sense of, perhaps some sense of a functional role that you think is maybe an integral part of perhaps a new business you want to start as a means of transitioning from your current employment and source of income into something that you feel is more aligned with what you really are and why you're really here. And in terms of extracting yourself from in the context of extracting yourself as much as possible from the 3D system of control. So you're looking into that, and perhaps there's something you want to do, and you feel, for example, that, gee, I'd be really good at this, except I don't know how to fill in the blank. Well, that's perfect. And we'll say, for example, speaking, communication. Perhaps you don't feel like you're a good communicator. Well, that would be a great focal point for meditation. Tuning into, pardon me, your different versions of yourself, one or more versions that had those capacities. And who knows, maybe a past or an other life memory will come to you. And also, it's key that you also take steps now, take a speech course, a public speaking class. It's about stretching, getting out of comfort zones, because the comfort zones that we've been entrained to reside within Comfort zones are regressive zones. The uncomfortable comfort zones, and they get called comfort zones even though they're not, because we're just so accustomed to being in them, to seeing ourselves this way or that way, and unable to see ourselves that way. Limiting. That's what all this, that's another big part of what all this control and suppression is about. Continually reining us further and further in, entrapping us in preset societal and functional roles. Shrinking, and beginning by shrinking our own inclinations or desires to perform in different ways than we have been. Take on different, pardon me, excuse me, societal or functional roles. Because we've been so traumatized, so mind conditioned, so suppressed, that we believe that we are restricted to, I can only do this, this, or this, based on the experience that I've got. Believe me, whatever, pardon me, and no matter how generous you might be with yourself at this point, saying, well, I can do this and I can do that, you can do more. You can do more. But expand your perception of yourself. We begin doing this by clearing the stuff out of the way. Pardon me. Pardon me. Tons of chemtrailing going on. But expanding and stretching. It's like maybe we experiment with something that we haven't ever, we've admired it in others. We haven't considered it for ourselves. And I'm not talking about, let's say it's not likely, but just as an example, a diehard sports fan of some different type, one sport or another. And I'm not talking about, okay, you're 47 years old and now you want to be a professional soccer player. I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about functional roles, different ways to explore and expand yourself and your consciousness. Undergirding the fact that if you're a sincere self-mastery ascension path traveler, that's just one of the underlying principles. You will be what you need to be when you need it. That's the way this process works. That's just one of the principles. But taking that to the next step, taking that to a more intentional level and consciously exploring potential different functional roles. Explorer. Researcher. Perhaps because there's so much information online now, that you've gotten a little lazy and you rely completely on others' research. Experiment with doing your own. Now, I'm not talking about getting stuck in rabbit holes and getting caught up in that, but just with the functional, experimenting with that functional role. Seeing yourself through experience as a competent researcher, an investigator. it's oftentimes a healer. Perhaps you don't necessarily, you haven't acknowledged, or you aren't fully cognizant yet of, but something's bubbling within you, perhaps some psychic ability, or perhaps you're just kind of coming to realize that you have empathic skills. So looking at different ways, even if you don't want to necessarily go into business, develop a practice, but different ways that you can expand upon those capacities. And perhaps more in the background, because maybe those in your life don't necessarily, they aren't ready for that, but just within yourself, expanding those skills while you're listening to one of your friends or family members. Maybe they're not ready to receive, and you need to be sensitive to that. But just attuning to that capacity within yourself and exploring and coming to discover what being, having these empathic abilities really means for yourself in terms of the self-mastery journey. What does it really mean? Just explore how how can I best use this ability to help advance not only my own progress, but the progress of others, even if it's in the background. Explore, experiment. Now, a number of people on this journey have come to see themselves, maybe they've always felt like they were performing this functional role anyway, but a teacher, a guide, a mentor, a coach. And that's good and well. But the one role, there's one role, there's several others, but this one role that many of them who have stepped into, perhaps they have become a coach in this area, or perhaps in another area, perhaps a business coach, or a fitness coach, or a nutrition coach, diet and nutrition. But they've stepped into the role of teacher in a real conscious way, an overt way. But I notice a lot in this community, in this work, other people are out there, that the one role that many have forgotten, the functional role that we all are on this journey, and that keeping this role in mind, and I'll get there in just one more minute. And there are those among us who have a really hard time seeing ourselves as a teacher or a guide or a mentor, because we have been so traumatized and brainwashed to think otherwise. Oh, I couldn't be that. Who am I? Who am I to be doing this? Well, but experiment. And a good way to do that, you can do it after you finish watching this video, and whatever videos of mine you continue to watch, is sharing your experiences that have helped you, the experiences that you've learned from and helped you grow on this journey. Just sharing that information. You have no idea how many people might be profoundly impacted by your experience, and how withholding that information doesn't serve you either. to continue seeing yourself as not being worthy or not having anything of significance to share is judgment. That's regressive consciousness. You're judging yourself and what you know. And that relates back to programming. So that means that's a big indicator that you still need to continue working on some belief or set of beliefs. You haven't fully cleared that. To think that who am I to do that? That goes right back to core wounding. I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. So that's to think that I can't be that. And I'm not talking from a skill set perspective, but from a who am I to do that? So there's those on the journey that have that perspective. And then there's those on the journey who eagerly, quickly step into the role of a coach or a mentor or spiritual advisor or counselor or whatever. And they forget the one role that all of us need to keep first and foremost above all other functional roles. And that's the role of student. Student. You know, how many people are out there in this arena that present themselves as, and perhaps they really are, great teachers, but they have a lot of, really helpful information. But you kind of get a sense of that they don't necessarily ever turn to anyone else, or if they do, they're not talking about it, because they want to present themselves as somehow having arrived. I've made it. And I'm sitting here looking down to you so that you can come up to my level. And I see this a lot. And some really extreme versions of that. And I know you all have experienced that too. But forgetting that no matter what functional roles that we want to step into or experiment with in different ways, that the role of student is first and foremost. Those of us on this journey at some level, if we don't already know it, we're learning it, we've heard it. It's that everyone we encounter, every person we encounter along the way is a teacher. Everyone. Well, that's not of much benefit to us unless we see ourselves also as a student. And so many that can't and do not see themselves as teachers, they keep themselves restricted to the role of student because they don't believe they have the I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, that they have anything of value to offer. That holds you back. That holds you back. Sharing what you know. It doesn't matter if you have perfect grammar. Ignore that kind of crap that goes on in social media. But sharing what you know. Doesn't have to be a novel, but a few remarks or a couple of paragraphs about something you went through. And I can assure you that somebody who sees that is going to benefit. Including me. I learn. I see myself as a perpetual student. And I owned that role long before I was on any sort of an awakening or self-mastery and ascension journey. It was assuming that and taking responsibility for that and all that implies and really contemplating that. I told that to myself often. I am a student of life. And I knew that I was. And of course, that's before I could see myself, on the flip side of that, that I might have something to offer. And yet, to some extent, I did. In the workplace and all that, I was, confident there. But in every other area, it's like I'm a perpetual student of life. And I took that very seriously and put that into play in every way that I could. Reading, studying, and this is long before the internet. But listening. And there's an art to really listening. This is one of the things that even before I was, in this, serving as a guide in this capacity, but in the roles I played as business, career coach, and life coach before, is listening. And the bulk of the responsibility is on the one who is communicating information, let's say in a conversation, in an exchange between yourself and one or others. For the communicator has the bulk of the responsibility for communicating, getting the idea across in a way that others can understand it. And you say, well, it's not my fault if somebody doesn't understand me. Well, to some extent, you'd be right, but making a conscious effort to be so attuned to the other person or persons as they're speaking that you are able to communicate in the most clear way possible, to the best of your ability, what you do mean to say. And this comes, there's some study involved. This is about perhaps taking a communication course, but practicing in everyday conversations. And how do we become a really good listener? First, by taking responsibility for what you say. You're responsible for what you say, for what you put out there. And to a large extent, how it is interpreted. Not completely, because this is a co-creative process, but it's incumbent upon you to do it to the best of your ability. And that comes from learning to be a good listener of others. Getting a good sense of where other people are at in this process or in the conversation. And becoming a really good listener, guess what? Revolves around being present moment focused. You're in the now. You're not thinking about what you're going to say while they're speaking. Because if you're doing that, then you're not really hearing. Oh, you're hearing, but you're not really listening. And you're missing nuances and energetic information. The nuances of voice, body language. And as I said, not to mention the energetic nuances, the nuances of their emanations in that process. You're missing out. If you're thinking about what you're going to say in response to the other person, then you're not fully there, attuned to, and able to hear what they're really saying. And therefore, you're undercutting your ability to provide perhaps the one thing that they most need to hear from you. Because you're busy thinking about what you should say instead of being aligned with and attuned to and letting higher consciousness move through you You're not thinking, you're sensing. With mindfulness, present moment awareness, attunement, so that you can really hear and sense what's being conveyed to you so that you can choose the wisest possible response to those energies. And the wisest possible response is that which serves both the expansion of your consciousness as well as theirs. The truest expression of who you are. And what's the truest expression of who you are is that's flows forth from your capacity to be in the moment and to be aligned with soul and core self-consciousness. So whatever functional roles you decide to experiment with, see yourself as the perpetual student of life and this journey. You're learning, you're constantly open to learning and stretching. And you don't label yourself. Again, I'm calling these functional roles. So it's something that you do. It's not what you are. Because as soon as we label ourselves this or that, the easier it becomes to become ego identified with, attached to. And this is the place from which, distortions unfold, belief systems, believing that you are this or you are that, instead of, no, these are just roles I'm performing. This is why I don't refer to myself as a coach or a mentor or a guide or a counselor of any sort. Those are roles that I play in the process of doing this work and working with others, but I'm not identified with them. I just attune to the individual, how we're relating, and it flows from that. I'm not identified with it. I'm identified with, if anything, and not ego identified, but true self identified with progressing on this journey. So I hope you'll experiment with this, especially those of you who might be feeling a little bit lost, and kind of like you've lost touch with who you are and how to express what you are and exhibit that in this reality as you're moving through this process. If you don't know yourself or you're feeling a little bit lost, but again, these are steps that we take, conscious steps that we take to facilitate that. And you don't know what you might learn about yourself through experimenting with these things. And even if you don't see yourself as an artist of any sort or a writer, find some way, and those might be two ways that you experiment with, to be creative, to express creatively. So many jobs, societal roles, the job that you have, keep us intentionally from expressing creativity. If you have that in your work, good for you. But many don't. And so it's really important to find ways to express that, and again, this isn't about locking yourself into anything. It's about play and having fun. And maybe that experimentation and that creativity comes perhaps in the form of whatever physical routine you have. Your physical fitness routine is part of restoring the mind-body complex. Be creative in that. Be creative in your diet. Shake it up. Play, but some form of intentional creativity. Doesn't have to be elaborate. You don't have to go spend a fortune down at the art store. I'm not talking about any of that. But in ways that kind of stretch you. You go, oh, I hadn't really tried that before. I've never really thought of myself as being capable of doing this or that. But experiment. Play with it. Have fun. All right. Well, on that note, I'm going to call it a wrap. And please include your comments below. Share with us how you've perhaps maybe worked through some of this, how you were able to tap more into things that you didn't even know until you experimented with that you could do or wanted to do. Or share, the struggles that you're having now, that the situation that you're in now. And I'm sure many others would be able to relate. Ask questions. Participate. Step out of the roles and the things you're doing now. Maybe you're one of those people who never comments anywhere ever social media. Well, I'm not. It's like, okay, that's fine. But at the same time, if that's done out of fear, then you're undercutting yourself. If you're doing it because you're afraid to, then that's regressive. That's a regressive approach, regressive consciousness. I'm not suggesting that you go crazy with it, but an occasional comment, I mean, that's like owning and stepping out of your fear. And along those lines, if you haven't already done so, I invite you to take advantage of a free consultation with me, a 1-hour session. Maybe we can come up with some ideas. I assure you I can. But to share what's going on in that way. And you have absolutely nothing to lose because it is complimentary. And you will walk away with a next step plan of action that you can implement immediately to help you in this area or any other area that you're struggling with right now. In any case, if you found this information of benefit, please share it with others. And if you haven't already subscribed, I invite you to do that either on YouTube or on my website. Leave your comments below. I invite you. And the book is still forthcoming. It's on its way. And these other courses. So hang in there with me. And until we meet again, take care. And I wish you all the best on your journey. So long for now.